Good morning and welcome to the Global Youth Summit on Net Zero Future Food and Health. We will be starting shortly. This session is being recorded. Thank you.
Welcome. On behalf of Yale University and with our partner Tsinghua University, I'm delighted to launch this webinar. I'm grateful to the Yale School of Nursing and the Global Alliance of Universities for Climate for hosting this discussion about climate change and health. And thank you, Dean Ann Kurth, for inviting me to participate. As leaders around the world prepare for the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, it is important to demonstrate the commitment of universities to addressing this existential crisis. At Yale, we believe strongly in the power of research and education. Our efforts are rooted in the work taking place across the whole university as part of our Planetary Solutions Project. This university-wide initiative calls on Yale to provide leadership in tackling environmental challenges that threaten life on Earth and to use the campus as a laboratory for implementing the best technologies, policies, and ideas. The greatest contributions Yale will make to the fight against climate change will come from its research, teaching, and graduates. I'm pleased to see that today's seminar is showcasing the discoveries and ideas of students. I hope you will exchange ideas and apply what you learned from today's webinar in your work and life. Thank you for working with us to make a difference.
Welcome, everyone. Good day. We're glad that you can join us across all time zones. We appreciate your taking the time to be here for the Global Alliance of Universities on Climate, third forum on Graduate Forum and Global Youth Summit on Net Zero Future, the topic of climate, food, and health. I'm Ann Kurth, Dean of the Yale School of Nursing, and it's my honor to open today. I'll keep my remarks brief. This is a crucial week at a very pivotal time. As the world watches for COP26, we all are well aware from every continent and in every local community of the effects of the climate crisis and other planetary health stresses on human health, food systems, and in fact, biodiversity of our fellow species on the planet. The health sector has a crucial role to play, both in mitigating its greenhouse gas emissions and environmental impact, and also to be adapted and prepared to address the needs of population displacement, extreme weather events, heat waves, drought, flooding, and all the elements that we know are part of this climate crisis. The effect on food systems, both for micronutrients and macronutrients, is also of grave concerns. We know the climate crisis is here. We know the impact on human health is already present and will accelerate. And we also know that there are things that we can and must do. And for that, I am encouraged by the generation of students, including those remarkable students we have with us today for our panel and our presentation. Your generation has a great burden, as do all of us on the planet at the moment, both for contributing to action solutions and also for continuing to activate and advocate, a crucial role. Dr. Erica Chenoweth, who is a social scientist at Harvard, they've analyzed civil resistance campaigns in the last century and found an interesting statistic, which is that basically no government was able to withstand a challenge of 3.5% of its population resisting without either accommodating or disintegrating. So think about that. Literally a small proportion of people can make a huge difference in where large structures go. And we know that we need large structural approaches now. I would argue also that higher education as a sector has a very crucial role. So each of you have taken the time to get engaged with going to graduate school, getting your Ph.D. or degrees. I hope you will become the faculty of the near future. But universities do have a distinct and unique role to play. Think about it. Where else can you have all the disciplines, engineering, the humanities, the health sciences, law, business, all the sectors that may be needed to come up with solutions for this complex crisis that we are in at present? That's all present on a campus. And so the network that is represented by GUAC, of course, recognizes this. And I challenge all of us in our role as being part of higher education to contribute to this climate crisis and addressing the planetary health challenges of our time. As President Salovey said, and I know the president of Tsinghua has also made commitments, at Yale University, we have committed to sustainability efforts. We are leveraging our science as well as our teaching in what we're calling the Planetary Solutions Project. And we've committed to net zero with some strategic offsets by 2035 and zero carbon emission campus by 2050. And I will tell you that we do have a game plan for how to get there, including working with our local community. So I won't spend any more time. Let's get right to the talent and contribution of our panelists and of our students during the session today. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome as our keynote speaker, Nazanin Charchi Agdam. Nazanin is a fifth-year Ph.D. student in chemical and biological engineering at the University of Saskatchewan. She is currently a sessional lecturer with the Department of Civil, Geological, and Environmental Engineering. Her research interests are catalysis, reaction engineering, and synchron-based characterization techniques for improving catalyst performance. During the last years, she's been working on developing innovative technologies for eliminating organic pollutants from the air. Nazanin's PhD thesis is centered on reducing fruit and vegetable losses by the abatement of ethylene from growth chambers and post-harvest facilities. After the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, she's been involved in the project for the inactivation of pathogens such as COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 in the air. Fantastic and fascinating work. Nazanin, please take it away.
Thank you, Dinkert, and I would like to thank you all the sponsors and organizers to provide me with this opportunity to present our research. I'm gonna share. I need to share my slide here. Okay, and share. Yes, thank you, Dean, for the introduction. Today, I will be talking about our research, which is about the minimizing carbon emission and fruit and vegetable losses by removing ethylene from storage and growth facilities. Briefly talking about the background of our research, all of us more or less are familiar with the ethylene gas. It's play an important role in agriculture industry to speed up the ripening process. And naturally, many fruits, vegetables, and flowers release ethylene as a hormone to control the growth and senescence. And they can continue to produce ethylene through their respiratory metabolism even after post-harvesting. But after a certain level, ethylene brings about chemical and physical changes and induces an undesirable effect of quick ripening, which results in a quality loss. And this happens at several stages, including grow rooms, greenhouses, storages, transport facilities, and even our refrigerators. This picture here is quite familiar for all of us. And typically, we just remove the spoiled fruit or vegetable from our refrigerator, and that's it. But this is a serious threat for our planet and our children's future. The annual loss of fresh fruit and vegetables caused by ethylene damage has been estimated to be as high as 10 to 80%, which is huge. And besides its economical losses, which is huge, this contributes to food insecurity and, more importantly, to the climate change. As you can see here, the carbon footprint of the produced food that is not being consumed is ranked as the third top carbon dioxide emitter after United States and China. And here, the post-harvest wastage is being ranked as biggest contributor to the food losses and waste. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal targeted 50% of food waste reduction by 2030, but how? One of the potential approaches to reach to this target is removing ethylene from the environment that I mentioned. And in this way, we can increase the shelf life of the fruit and vegetable. And how this is being done currently, there are some technologies that each of these technologies have certain advantages and disadvantages. And based on these numbers and statistics, unfortunately, they haven't been really effective. One of the very common methods that is being used in larger scale storage specifically is releasing a strong oxidizer such as ethylene and hydrogen peroxide to the environment of these storages. The idea is that these oxidizers are very reactive and they will be reacting with ethylene and converting them to the water and carbon dioxide. These oxidizers are very easy to produce and they are really cheap, but they have some certain disadvantages. Since they are harmful chemicals, typically they cannot be used in the presence of the human, which restrict their application. For example, they cannot be used in our refrigerators. And also, generally, there's a limitation in the concentration of these pollutants that are being released to the atmosphere. And in this way, the reaction with ethylene would be very slow and it will take time. So we can say that too little of them is not effective and too much of them is harmful. And more importantly, they are not smart. They react with ethylene, but really they don't care about the product that they are producing. And through this uncontrolled reaction, harmful byproducts could be produced as well. So what is our solution? Our solution is to add catalysts to this process and combine catalysts and strong oxidizers. And what is a catalyst? Just simply think of the catalytic converter in the exhaust of your car or the laundry detergents that they remove certain pollutants from certain environment. And if you remember from the high school chemistry, catalyst speaks of a chemical reaction and leads the reaction in a way that we want. And in simpler words, by adding catalyst to this process, this process will be conducted faster and with no harmful byproduct, the things that we want. So it can be applied in any environment in the presence of human, even it can utilize in our refrigerators and in any consumer's product as well. And also, since this process is being conducted at ambient temperature, its energy consumption and carbon footprint would be minimized. And how the process is working, this is a catalyst here. It will take the oxidizer and then through the process, it will convert it to the stronger and more active oxidizer, which is more reactive compared to this original version. And in this way, it accelerates the reaction. And also catalyst is staying here and supervising the reaction of the oxidizers with the ethylene to make sure that at the end, we will just have water and carbon dioxide, which is harmless with no harmful byproduct. And for us, the first step is to understand the chemistry behind this reaction. And then it takes several steps to design and make a potential new catalyst. At this stage, we need to know exactly what we have made. And to do so, we need to go to the atomic level to see what's happening over there. Going to the atomic level is not really easy. And it needs a specific infrastructure. It's where we are using Canadian light source, the brightest light in Canada, to do synchrotron-based characterization to study precisely the properties of the catalyst that we have made. And once our catalysts are ready, we need to have them tested. We need to see how they are working in removing ethylene. And to do so, in simple words, we have some steps to study the activity of the catalyst by trying to avoid very boring engineering things. Just the first step would be studying the catalyst in a simple dry air, which enable us to understand the chemistry of the reaction, optimize the catalyst preparation, and find our best and optimized catalyst. The second step would be to testing the catalyst in more complicated environment, which includes humidity, water in the air, and it's closer to the real environment that the technology will be applied. And finally, the next step is moving to the scaling of the process and building a demonstration unit and getting closer to the commercializing the process. And what have we done so far? We have completed the first step, which is working in a dry air after investigating several parameters and many back and forth in catalyst design, characterization, and activity measurements. We found a catalyst that works very well in dry atmosphere. This catalyst, as you can see here, it's able to totally convert these oxidizers to stronger oxidizers, and because of that, it's able to completely convert ethylene to carbon dioxide and water at ambient temperature. And also recently we have moved to the second step, which is humid environment. Working in humid environment is quite challenging for any catalytic processes because of the presence of water, and especially because we want to run the process at ambient temperature. At elevated temperature, everything would be easier, but we want to minimize the energy consumption of the process and carbon footprint of the process. So we are working a lot on the design of the catalyst to find a catalyst that is working very well at ambient temperature. Our catalyst is working very well at in humidity environment as well, but still we are working to improve the activity of the catalyst. And is this the end of our story? Of course, no. We are still working to design and make a better catalyst. Our new catalysts have more complicated structures, so more back and forth in design and characterization and activity measurements. If you see here, if we go to the atomic level, they have a very complicated structure. And also at the other project, at the same time, we have been working on applying the same technology, combining the catalyst and strong oxidizers combination to inactivation of the pathogens in the air, because pathogens in the air have been considered as responsible for fruit and vegetable losses. And we are hoping that by combining these two projects, by removing ethylene and these pathogens from the air at the same time, we will have more chances in decreasing fruit and vegetable losses. And also at the same time, based on the promising laboratory scale results, we have moved to the next step and scaling of the project. We have been working on designing and manufacturing catalysts for pilot scale application for larger scale. And also the next step for us would be to optimize our process and finally feasibility study for commercializing our process. At the end, as a concluding remark, again, I would like to highlight the importance of our research. Fruit and vegetable losses, besides its economic damage and food insecurity, has a high carbon footprint. Reducing the wastage, this wastage can be a game-changing strategy in reducing greenhouse gas emission and battle against climate change. Moreover, it's one step forward in providing more sustainable food sources for everyone. So developing efficient and effective method for removing ethylene from the storage environment at any level, including growth, transportation, retail, and consumers, could be a potential approach to reach this target. And at the end, I would like to acknowledge the financial support of University of Saskatchewan and NSERC, and a great technical support of the Canadian Light Source. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nazanin. That was really interesting work and important. Thank you for sharing that. Really, it gave us a lot to be encouraged about. So thank you for that. It's now my pleasure to be able to introduce the student moderators for the next panel. Jessica Bediako is a second-year graduate student at the Yale School of the Environment, pursuing a master's in environmental management. She's committed to bringing sustainability to the corporate world globally, and this reflects her keen interest in corporate sustainability and climate change solutions, and her belief in the possibility of businesses thriving and still keeping the environment safe. Ian Reilly is a second-year Master of Public Health student at Yale School of Public Health, studying health policy and the impacts of climate change on health, where he's involved with the Yale Center on Climate Change and Health and the Yale Center on Environmental Justice. His career goals include supporting policies that aim to mitigate persisting racial and social health disparities and promoting climate justice by amplifying structurally marginalized voices. So thank you both for beginning our panel.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. That was so kind. And thank you, Nazanin, for that, that wonderful presentation. That was very informative. Yeah, this is a great opportunity. I'd like to now just introduce myself, Ian Reilly, and my partner, Jessica. We're going to be moderating the student panel. So we have students from around the world, and they've been doing some wonderful, wonderful work in the field of climate change that I think has great implications for the future of this fight against climate change. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and let us roll the introductory videos that explain what the work they did that they'll be talking about today.
Hello everyone, my name is Charlotte, and I am currently a Ph.D. student of Tsinghua University. My field of research and study is low carbon economics and financial risk analysis, and my research is an interdisciplinary subject that encompasses the environment, economy, and socioeconomic systems. In particular, I am very interested in how do the economy and socioeconomic factors such as unemployment and economic output such as GDP and economic structure impacts and influences air pollution, in particular carbon dioxide and particulate matter. And I'm very excited and happy to have the opportunity to participate in this conference this year and to be able to share my research and learn from all of you. I look forward to meeting all of you, and yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jordan. I am a PhD student from the Department of Earth System Science, Tsinghua University. Today, I'm going to share my work on near real-time monitoring of global carbon dioxide emissions, reviews the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So since the Industrial Revolution, due to the fossil fuel combustion in an industrial process, humans have emitted more than nearly 1.7 trillion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. For a long time, people could only be able to assess the carbon dioxide emissions annually from previous carbon dioxide emission datasets, and those datasets have 1 or more years lag for their data updating. So it was impossible to check the near real-time emission changes. So here, we proudly present our new carbon dioxide emission dataset called Carbon Monitor. For the first time, we are able to assess and check the carbon dioxide emissions at daily level from fossil fuel combustion and cement production process. So we built this dataset based on a variety of near real-time activity data, including hourly electricity generation data from 30 countries, traffic congestion data over 400 cities worldwide, near real-time flight status, industrial production over 60 countries. Based on this high temporal resolution data, we finally calculate the global daily carbon dioxide emissions with detailed information in 6 sectors. Based on such daily carbon dioxide emission dataset, the decline affected by the COVID-19 pandemic was captured in this year. In the first half year of 2020, emissions have declined 8.8% compared to the same period of 2019, reducing 1.6 gigaton carbon dioxide during this period. Due to the lockdown policies, which restrict human mobility, transportation has been the most affected sector. Emissions from ground transportation sector decreased 19% in the first half year of 2020, contributing 40% of the total emission decline. The most significant emission drop in percentage was from the aviation sector, with a decrease of 44%. So our daily carbon dioxide dataset is freely available on the website carbonmonitor.org. You can also get access to our paper on Nature Communications for this detailed methodology. That's all. Thanks for listening.
My name is Hong Tao. I'm from Wanke School of Public Health, Tsinghua University. My research interest is environmental epidemiology. I'm concerned about the health effect of environmental change, including climate change. We all know that human health and Earth's climate are closely correlated, and abnormal climate could induce impaired human health. Therefore, we should pay more attention to the relationship between climate change and human health, since now climate change is a very important issue. This time, my research topic is prenatal and early life exposure to abnormal climate and output cognitive function. In my research, we use data from China Family Panel Studies, which is a national large-scale follow-up survey of Chinese families and individuals. We used the sea surface temperature anomalous in Nino 3.4 region as exposure data. To estimate the sea surface temperature anomalous exposure and cognitive ability, we used the linear and non-linear mixed effect model and B-spline as the smoothie function. Finally, we found an inverse U-shaped curve between their prenatal and early life climate conditions and output mass test score. We also identified the second and third trimester to be the critical period. Thank you.
Hi, I am Sanchayan, and I am a fourth-year doctoral candidate in environmental economics at the London School of Economics and Political Science. In my research, I'm broadly interested at looking at the intersection of behavioral and environmental economics in order to engage our citizens into more pro-environmental and pro-social behaviors. The way I do it is using a new toolkit that I have invented along with Professor Peter John at King's College, which we call the Nudge Plus. What a Nudge Plus does is it embeds an element of reflection into the nudge. Now, you might ask me, why do we need a Nudge Plus when we already have a nudge, and what justifies its use? Well, the use of behavioral insights in the last 10 years has increased by almost about 100 times, and most of it is being driven by the use of nudges. As cost-effective as nudges are, they suffer from a major ethical criticism, which is they manipulate people into acting in a certain way. Nudges change the environment in which you behave so that you keep acting in a similar way as you would have earlier. However, because now there is a nudge, you would engage in good behaviors. And you can understand where this ethical criticism comes from. Because nudges change the means, it kind of coerces you very implicitly in changing your behavior. And that's where a lot of people have ethical criticisms about the nudges. What I do with my Nudge Plus research, I show that if I embed an element of reflection where I make people think either about how the nudge has been constructed, or I make them think on why do they need the nudge before providing the nudge, the effectiveness of the nudge increases by almost about 14%. In particular, I show this using an online survey experiment in which I combine different nudges and nudge pluses in reducing the consumption of carbon-intensive diets in the United Kingdom. In this randomized control trial, I use 3,074 people in the United Kingdom, and they're asked to place an order for an online delivery using a restaurant choice card. In placing this order, we find that when we use the Nudge Plus interventions, then the intended consumption of carbon-intensive items, which includes items like beef and ruminant meat, goes down by about 14%. Therefore, we're showing a new way of nudging people, a way which is more transparent, a way which is more consensual, a way which respects the autonomy and the agency of the people. Our work does not invalidate the work on nudges so far, but what I show particularly in this paper and using my toolkit of Nudge Plus is that nudges can actually go very, very long in reducing actually these consumptions which are not good for the environment or the society. We can scale up the effect of nudges just by tweaking a small thing, make people think about why they need the nudge or tell them how the nudge was constructed. Building in this transparency might be the answer of scaling up a lot of our efforts using nudges. I look forward, and I think I will engage more with you on the discussions of Nudge Plus in this conference and beyond. Thank you and have a good day.
Hi everyone, my name is Go from the University of Tokyo. I major in environmental engineering and environmental policy, and I'm currently a master second year student. I'm so honored to join Global Youth Summit for the Net Zero Future. My research field is around human health and air pollution. Speaking of my research, air pollution is so severe around the world, and currently 1 in 7 people suffer from respiratory disease, and Tokyo is no exception. And we don't know what's contribute to respiratory disease. My research makes clear of what causes respiratory disease in Tokyo, and we are able to confirm a strong relationship between nitrogen dioxide and respiratory mobility. Nitrogen dioxide is derived from automobile exhaust gas and is a causative agent of photochemical oxidant and acid rain. And according to our study, we also confirmed that strong relationship between temperatures and the respiratory mortality. On the other hand, this study evaluates the health hazard reduction effect of EV policies. Introducing the framework here, we conducted air pollution simulations and predicted changes in the number of respiratory disease patients and deaths from respiratory disease mobility and mortality models. After that, the amount of health damage reduction was calculated using DALI, which is an index for converting health damage into monetary amount. We have found that EV policy have a health hazards reduction impact of around 100 million. And currently, Tokyo is trying to introduce 50% of zero emission vehicle in total automobile by 2050. But considering 2% of current level, it's far from feasible. My research evaluates the amount of EV health damage reductions and helps to move forward EV diffusion policy. That's my research introductions of me, and I'm looking forward to open discussion with you. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, I'm always so happy when I get to see those videos. It's so exciting to see the work that's going on in our field, especially when it's so interdisciplinary and so important that we're doing this work. So the way we'd like to structure the student panelist discussion going forward now is going to be to start with individual questions. So we have a question prepared for each of the individual panelists. We'll ask those, and then once we finish the individual section, we'll move on to a set of group questions where each of the panelists will have the opportunity to respond to those. So I will start with the first individual question. My first question is for panelist Ju Dong. So Ju Dong, during your video, you talk about near real-time monitoring of global CO2 emissions and the effect it revealed about the COVID-19 pandemic. So the question we had prepared for you is, in times past, it has been impossible to check in real time the carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel combustion. And this project turns the needle. Are there opportunities for further research in this subject matter? And if so, what would those be?
Okay, thanks, Ian. Yes, as you said, our data set is currently the only carbon dioxide emission data set that has the ability of near real-time updates and also the daily emission data. And our daily emission data also for the first time shows the seasonal patterns, weekly cycles, and daily variations of emissions, which enable us to do more analysis on the patterns of emission changes, as well as the human activities. So as we continue to update the daily emissions, it will be possible to monitor and detect subtle changes in activity and behavior. For example, based on our latest daily emission data up to September 30th, 2021, we find that in the first 9 months of 2021, the global carbon emissions increased by nearly 7% compared to the same period of 2020. And the emissions are only 1% lower relative to the same period of 2019. So it reflects that although we are still suffering from the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, our carbon emissions and also the economic and also the activities have already rebounded. But ambitious climate goals such as limiting the increase in global temperature to 1.5 degrees leave no time for such a carbon rebound. So it is here that the value of near real-time monitoring to the policy making, our near real-time estimates are expected to shorten the response time of policy adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you for that that well-encompassed response. That was wonderful, Ju Dong. For our next question, I will be moving on to Sunchayan. And Sunchayan, your presentation in your 3-minute video discussed embedding the reflection in the behavioral cues to promote low carbon diets. I hope I summarized that well. And the project question we have for you is, in your submission, you mentioned that this evaluation is the first of its kind in environmental and behavioral public policy, and the opportunities for further research. Also, in knowing that it takes more than a nudge to get people to change to sustainable diets, are there other dietary approaches that can be taken by key stakeholders in contribution to reducing climate change?
Thanks, Ian. That was a good summary, and thank you for the introduction. I think these questions are very important, and they kind of go back a bit to the traditional tools of economics and public policy in regulating not just dietary behavior, but in general, all other kinds of behavior. Now, I think where diets are important and how regulation plays in, you're right in questioning that, yes, there are other tools, and an economist's favorite in this case would be a carbon tax. The EU ETS has been going on with its trading scheme. We've seen imposition of meat taxes in the countries. So yes, the approaches would be taxes banning these kind of meat products. However, the reason they don't work, or people are a bit skeptical to adopt it, including governments, is if governments impose these kind of structures, then they can easily draw the criticism of being a nanny state, because diets are very core habits. You don't want to sort of come across as paternalistic when it comes to these kind of regulatory tools, which are authoritarian. In this regard, the behavioral space has been expanding, and particularly with the use of nudges. So more bottom-up approaches are available these days, and this is what my research focuses on. And while nudges are sort of very reflexive, because as I explained, you're not aware of the changes that are happening around you. What we kind of put forward are citizen engagement techniques. So not just educator forums or citizen forums, but a subtle way of helping people reflect on how to use the nudge better. So yeah, there can be a spectrum of these policies. And I'm not saying they're necessarily substitutes. I'm currently actually working on looking at combining different of these toolkits together to see if there is some sort of complementarity in the use of these different toolkits.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for letting us know a little bit about the future work that you're doing to continue your previous research. It's really exciting to see what comes out of that. And I'll move it over to Jessica to introduce the next few questions.
Great. So moving on to you, Go. That was really an interesting research you have there. And one of the questions we have for you is, in your model, you explicitly mentioned nitrogen oxide to appear to be the primary contributor of respiratory morbidity and for mortality and temperature increase as well. For you as a change maker, you recommended the need for a cost-benefit analysis of Tokyo's emission reduction agenda. We are interested to know how resourceful do you think findings from your research would be in mitigating climate change and its health impacts, particularly on Tokyo?
Thank you, Jessica, for your question. I think it's quite useful. First of all, to solve climate change, my research has shown that rising temperatures as well as air pollutants lead to higher respiratory illness. In other words, you could say that air pollution control measures are closely related to climate change here. And I also suggested that introductions of EVs, a future generation car, will not only improve air quality, but also reduce temperatures by up to 0.6 degrees Celsius. In addition, the introductions of EVs has led to the reductions of $100 million human health hazards. So I think this knowledge will be useful here in Tokyo, promoting policies from perspective of human health. And thank you for your question.
Great, thank you too. Our next question is to you, Charlotte. So Charlotte, in your research, you also recommended the need for internalized externalities to avoid green priorities from being compromised. Really, we are more curious to know which key stakeholders do you think should take the front seat when it comes to economic recovery? This could be China or generally, but we want to pick your thoughts on that based on your research.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Thank you. This is a really great question. But before I deep dive into the specifics of my response, I want to first say that in terms of stakeholders, there are like a lot of key players in this issue. For example, the government, the capital market, and the players in the market, such as like big firms and emitters. And there's also, of course, like ordinary people like us. And and also other like NGOs and grassroots and who are very vocal about about climate change and like other solutions. But actually, I think overall, from my perspective, I sort of see it as a I think of it like playing a game of chess where everyone need to put forward their own agenda and play out their steps to get what they want. And but so basically everything in here are all interconnected in a system. And what I think is really important is that, of course, we live in a capital-based economy, and it's very difficult to change it. So, I mean, obviously, in reality, the big firms, the government, and the capital itself will be key players, at least in the near to near future. But I think in order to really internalize the externalities and to make positive changes, it's really important to make everyone be aware of how the different parts of the system, of both socioeconomically and environmentally, how they are interconnected, so that we know about the implications of our actions. So that's a really big, really important starting point to internalize these externalities in the system. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. Of course, it's really, when it comes to climate change, it's really all hands on deck. So in as much as, of course, there's a need for the key players to take the front seat, I agree with you. Really, it's everyone's business and everyone needs to play a role. So I'll pass it on to Ian, who will be taking us through the next phase with our last question. Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica. So our last individual panelist question is going to be directed towards Hong Tong. And so Hong Tong, in your video, in your work, you performed multiple statistical analyses establishing an association between prenatal and early life exposure to anomalous sea surface temperature and that effect on adult cognitive function. And actually you even go as far as to imply the implications on the economy. And so I'd love to hear from you that, apologies. Let's see. Oh, so the exposure to anomalous high and low sea surface temperatures can lead to reduced cognitive function as adults, even going so far as to quantify that economic loss. With climate change, we expect sea surface temperatures to continue rising. Is there work being done to model the possible stunting effects in future climate scenarios, or its effect on the economy of China or globally?
Okay, thank you, Ian. Now, we didn't do related analysis to estimate the impact of future climate change on human health and the economy of China. But I think it's a very good point to combine it with my current study. In the next step, we will consider this aspect because based on our research, the impact of climate change on adult cognitive function and the economy of China were huge, which cannot be ignored. Therefore, the analysis on future impact could be an interesting part, which also could help people pay more attention to the adverse effects of global climate change. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to see what comes out of the work that you did. I've seen other work that established that elevated temperatures can lead to lower test scores in students, and so it's interesting to see the effects of anomalous temperatures in both low and high directions and how they can have an effect on later life cognitive function. So thank you for your work. So that was our last individual question. I'm posting into the group chat from Zoom the extended 15-minute or so videos from all of our panelists on the Yale School of Nursing website right now. So if any of our viewers today would like to take a look at a more comprehensive look at what our panelists did over the to prepare for today, that'll all be available to you. So moving on to the group questions, what we'll be doing is allowing each of the presenters to have the opportunity to respond to each of these. Our first question today is, in tackling global climate change, will require a global interdisciplinary approach. What role did teamwork play in your research? And what transferable lessons do you think could be adopted globally by all stakeholders in the fight against climate change? Hong Tong? Oh, Hong Tong, you're muted.
Okay, Okay, thank you, Yan. So since my research is to investigate the impact of global climate change on human health, we need to investigate with the knowledge of global climate change and have the ability of statistical analysis. I think we could conduct climate-related health research better with the people in different research fields. For example, in our research, and Dr. D, and he has a deep understanding of the climate change, who chose some indicators to reflect the climate changes, such as the ENSO indicators, including sea surface temperature normalized, SST, and southern oscillation index, and outgoing long-wave radiation. And as for me, I conducted the statistical analysis using software. Therefore, in order to fight against climate change, scholars in different research fields such as climate change, public health, geographical information system should work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Sanchay?
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Tang. Yeah, I think I agree quite a lot with the interdisciplinarity that is needed to sort of tackle climate change. I think one of the things which sort of is coming round and round in discussing the solutions is the urgency to act. It is quite a pressing problem of our times. There has been work going on in the past 40 years, but still there is no affirmative action on how we deal with it. So there's an urgency to act. And the second thing that comes along with this debate is the agency. People should take responsibility for what they've been doing. And this responsibility should come in not just from the top down, sort of the governmental pressures or governmental sort of these narratives and the COP or these kind of goals, but also at a citizen level where sort of my work is. Now, more in terms of the teamwork which I've faced, I'm trained as an economist, but what I've realized is I think it needs forces coming together to sort of come up with a solution. And even then, we might not have a solution. And in my research, I sort of combine political science, behavioral economics, or science, which is sort of prominent in my work on nudges, but also lessons from economics and how we can sort of use philosophy to sort of think about the ethics of change. In going forward, I'm actually looking to map some of these responses to brain networks. I'm trying to move a bit more into STEM. But yeah, I totally agree that there is a need for a very interdisciplinary approach in at least resolving some of these issues of urgency and agency.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, I saw your hand come up during that. Would you like to go next? Charlotte, you're muted.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I would like to address the interdisciplinary aspect of the question. So basically, well, in my field, my field is low carbon economics and financial risk analysis. So basically, it's an interdisciplinary field that encompasses both economic theory and models and concepts, and we apply them to environmental issues and problems. And what I've learned over the last couple of years, like from doing like my own research projects and writing my own papers, is that a lot of it is about like pushing boundaries of different academic disciplines and different academic subjects. And it's all about, and sometimes it's, I mean, at least for me, like sometimes it's really difficult because I don't necessarily have a lot of different, I don't have a lot of like background in everything. So it's really important to like talk to others and, you know, yeah, and to learn from each other. Yeah.
Great, thank you for the lessons. It's wonderful. Judong, I think I saw your hand come up.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to take myself for an example. My research team, or our research team, the carbon monitor research team, is an international team. We have more than 40 co-authors or members from different countries, such as China, Japan, United States, and France. And our members also come from different research areas because we are using the big data methods to solve the climate problems and analyze the socioeconomic impacts. So our members come from the areas of environmental science, data science, mathematics, and economy. But due to the pandemic, we are impossible to meet or discuss face-to-face, and the international travels are not so low carbon as well. So we would exchange our ideas and data by email or using the Slack, or discuss or meet every week by using the Zoom. So our scientific outputs or achievements really rely on such an international research team for gathering expertise from different areas. And most interestingly, we can work 24 hours every day because we are in different time zones. So when we finish our work at night in Beijing, we could pass our data and result to our colleagues in France or United States, and so they are able to continue to work on. So I think the international teamwork really benefits our work and make it more efficient. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer. It's interesting that you bring up in different time zones. I feel that normally I hear that different time zones can make it more difficult to get work done, but it's great to hear how you are able to basically use different time zones to progress the project even when you're asleep. All right, and then last we'll go with Go Hashimoto.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, pretty much agreed what previous like panelists have said. But I think in my research project, I'm team up with experts in other fields, such as medicine, atmospheric science, and economics. And I've been discussing the result weekly. And I think in teamwork, it's very important to try to create innovation based on the opinion of experts in other fields, and also reach consensus while understanding the interests of each stakeholder. Well, I think it will be very important to understand the interests of stakeholders, set common goals, and have an innovative mindset in also fighting climate change as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
And I'll give it over to Jessica to ask the next two questions.
Okay. Great. So it's quite interesting to sort of like conclude your answer go with stakeholder management, because really it could, when it comes to teamwork, when it comes to working with people, when it comes to working with varied perspectives, of course, that could be challenging. So it's always great to know how to actually manage that. Moving on, many of you have had opportunity to conduct varied research. This is what you presented to us is just one of that, I know, but really this was done in the season of the COVID pandemic, which we have all faced challenges one way or the other in varied ways. Our question really is, what challenges did this particular era or this pandemic phase sort of like cause your project as compared to the pre-pandemic times? For example, with you, Tsinghua, you started your research before the pandemic, and then later you had to re-strategize during the pandemic. Was there a need to have to change things? Was there a need to have to be flexible? This is on a broader scale, or trying to enlighten every researcher, every scientist out there. How flexible should a research be? How flexible, what should you sort of like consider from the beginning stages just to accommodate uncertainties like this? Yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. I think, yeah, I mean, maybe others have, I mean, everyone has faced a problem. There's a phrase that comes to my mind. People started saying, we are all in a storm, but we are in different boats in that storm. So the effects have been varying for different people. For me, the idea initially was to actually run a field experiment and take it all to the field and run it in with real people in the field. But then all of that came to an end, and I'd already done a pilot survey which was related to my field. So I had to give myself about 8 months to translate this to an online platform using internet. And online survey experiments are quite popular these days. They're actually they're cheaper. They also take less time. But yeah, I wouldn't deny that it has been hard to do that transition. But now once I've done it, it has given me means, and probably I've become a bigger fan of online experiments now. Ever since I did this one, I have been doing another 3, which are now running. And it's just fantastic. But yeah, I think necessity is a mother of invention, as they say. So unless we face these challenging situations, I don't think we'll have new means. But I think we as individuals and researchers should always keep up with flexibility and adaptability in our work to sort of suit the means.
Anyone else could jump at it? Charlotte, would you want to go? Oh, okay, we have Go. All right, go for it. Yeah.
So I guess regarding this question, I guess the implications of COVID was that perhaps a lot of the concepts and theories and models before of how and why things happen, like maybe it doesn't, like COVID itself, like maybe whatever we know about economics and the environment and social science and things, maybe it wouldn't necessarily work in the same way, and it doesn't necessarily explain certain problems and like things and observations that we see. That's a really like that might be problematic, but at the same time, it gives us opportunities to learn more about COVID and how to deal with like certain issues, like COVID related issues, like in the economy, in the environment, and in the society, and etc. So that's, I think it's yeah, so it's, you know, a double-edged sword. But also I think the fact that like we couldn't meet each other physically in person, it like, yeah, that's but thanks to, you know, Zoom and other platforms, like it's made possible. So yeah, that's what I want to share.
So just to build on what you said, Charlotte, just to go a bit more further, what one lesson would you say you learned through all this, and what if you'd have to pass it on to another scientist, what would be that one thing in this particular situation or era we find ourselves in?
I guess the lesson that I have learned and I'm still learning is just like when life gives you like a problem or something that you find really difficult, like you have to, you know, learn to like stand up in the face of like problems, you know, don't let that get you down. So that's that's a really important thing that I'm learning. Yeah.
Great. Go Hashimoto, you raised your hand initially, you'd like to go.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Well, actually, like, I wanted to like solve the air pollution problem in India before like COVID-19 happening. So I initially like planned to go to India for like conducting field survey. However, like, you know, COVID-19 made it impossible. So I shifted to focusing the problem in Tokyo instead, where I lived and I can easily get data. I think these changes are unpredictable, but I think it's very important for scientists to have a second plan in your study. Yeah, that's my lesson. Yeah, that I learned.
Great.
During COVID period. Yeah.
Great. So one thing I picked from what you just said is you should always have a plan B, because you may never know what will happen. Okay, so Tan, would you want to go?
Okay, thank you, Jessica. During the COVID-19 pandemic, because we should avoid the human contact, so when we encounter difficulties during research, we need to share information and exchange ideas with others. We had to choose online meetings instead of face-to-face talk. But because our data have been collected before the pandemic, so this pandemic didn't force me to adapt my study design.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. So so I hear from you, Tang, and I hear from you, Go. There's sort of this intersection of course, having to change something. With you, Tang, is more of data. With you, Go, it's really the geographical location. Were there any financial burdens, costs that came with it? If yes, how were you able to absorb that? How did you go about it? And what would be the advice you'd want to extend to other researchers? Any one of you could go, really. Okay, so Go, would you want to go?
Yeah, I always think that it's important to have a plan B. And as you mentioned that, many you face many challenges like a financial problem or like a geographical challenges, but yes, my advice to the researchers that if you have like a plan B, like maybe you can like prioritize, maybe you can prioritize and you feel like happy about your decisions. So yes, always like prepare for like plan B. Yes, so that's my suggestion.
Okay, great. Okay, Sanchahan, actually I was going to get to you because I realized in your research you had to use 100 food vouchers. I was quite curious, really, with having to change some things. Tell me what you want us to learn from your experience.
I mean, I'll come to your question, but I think the other thing I wanted to address, more than just being flexible, is also to take things easy as they come, because I saw this propensity amongst researchers to jump on this bandwagon of COVID and come out and use this because I'm from the experimental world. Everyone saw COVID as a natural experiment, and everyone just wanted to maximize their publications that came out of COVID, which led to them losing their mental sanity. The ones who were not doing it got a bit depressed, that why can I not keep up with the trend. The ones who were doing it got very invested and started completely diverting their research agenda. So I think we should also be pragmatic about these exogenous shocks as and when they come, because I mean, I hope this is the last one, but I mean, we all know that it might not be, because these kind of zoonotic spillovers get exacerbated by something like climate change too. So there is a possibility in the near future where something like this might re-happen. And I think as researchers, we should learn, and also as citizens, I think we should learn not to forget some of the things that we learned now. I mean, people have already stopped wearing masks and stopped social distancing. I'm not saying you must do it, but then some of these tricks, I think you should take forward. So that's kind of my overall advice. Sort of more on your point on how to make this transition. Yeah, I mean, we were going to run it in restaurants, and we were going to work with pricing of menus and stuff like that. And all of that had to be accommodated in looking for a partner which would provide us with these vouchers and keeping the reality of the food menu intact. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's online and we all order online menus, but then when you're part of an experiment, there is still sort of that hypothetical bias that you're doing things differently. So yeah, we just did what the best we could of the resources that we had. And I'm actually conducting a field experiment now, finally, and I hope things don't get cancelled again. But I hope to replicate some of these results, because I think that's important too.
Great, thanks. So we'll move on to the next question. With the effects of climate change and the expected impact disproportionately on vulnerable populations, including the elderly, young children, low socioeconomic status individuals, how do you believe the research you have conducted could have been done to help mitigate these potential future global disparities in climate-related health outcomes? Okay, Tan, go for it.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Based on our research, we found that the impact of prenatal and early life abnormal climate was not evenly distributed in population. We found the female, old people, and low socio-economic status individuals and people from less developed regions were more vulnerable to abnormal climate. Therefore, we should pay more attention to these vulnerable populations, give them more help and support, such as the government should pay close attention to the usage of education resources in less developed regions. And also the gender differences also indicate we should give more education support to girls. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would want to go? Okay, go for it.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I think it's very important to consider like vulnerable people for like our research, like researchers, and also like policymakers as well. And in Japan, like traditional like measures against air pollution have been done for the majority and have not given much consideration to the vulnerable populations. And hence, my research suggests where the vulnerable population lives primarily and what regional measures should be taken to reduce medical cost and medical burden that must be spent due to the poor health conditions of vulnerable people. And we have also found that vulnerable people is more likely to have like bad health effects, bad health conditions. So it would be greatly appreciated if we could show this result to Tokyo. Yes, that's my vision. Thank you.
Great. Chu, would you want to go? Chu, would you want to go with answering this question?
Sorry, you're asking me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, like I said before, my research on the near real-time emission monitoring will be critical to the global community because we are able to detect the structural changes in emissions as soon as possible, and identify or possibly modify the policies that are less efficient or effective. And also, we would like to extend our near real-time monitoring to more specific countries, especially developing countries or less developed countries, or to the state level or city level. So I hope my research could help these countries to make their economic ambitions and take their steps for carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Okay. Charlotte, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So when I was thinking about this question just now, one of the things that came to my mind was when we talk about like vulnerable groups, it means that we don't usually hear about them in mainstream media. So in my research over the last 2 years, I found that like although in one aspect we can think about like the economy in terms of like, for example, the GDP of a particular country or region, but that's only the big picture. But at the same time, we don't necessarily see like, you know, the other side, such as those like who might be unemployed or the poor people. So what do we do? So I guess it's really important for like research or activisms or other implementations that can be can be done in practice, and then it's really important that we have the GAUC platforms and other similar things where we can make their voices heard. Yeah, I think that's very important.
Great. Anyone would like to go lastly on this question?
I'll take the last cue. I think the way I kind of look at this from my research could be broadly summarized in two different strands. So that one is the fact that climate change does have distributional consequences or effects on a lot of people, which includes vulnerable people. And we know that there are a few strategies to deal with climate change. So we can either mitigate the emissions or we can let people adapt to this. And more recently, geoengineering is sort of coming up where you shoot something in space and that captures the carbon. I think the way I look at this is particularly focusing on the adaptive behavior. And the reason for that is if climate change limits the way how people sort of can cognitively adapt, then that effective solution might not work. And some of it came through the work we saw today in how temperature might limit your cognitive ability from an early stage. So if you put people in these hot countries where temperatures might be going even further, adaptation might not be a solution for them anymore because climate change interferes with that solution. So that's one thing, and I'm sort of looking at that strand through my research. The other side to this is exploiting the socioeconomic and political differences, which Charlotte sort of mentioned, at looking at unemployed people, sort of these racial or ethnic minorities. And I think one of the concerns when you try out policies is that policies in themselves can have distributional consequences, which might go on to widen these existing gaps. So for instance, I was looking at a new sort of research yesterday where we were looking at how gender can have different sort of perceived levels of autonomy because of the gender stereotypes that we've been living in. So women feel they're less autonomous than men just because of how societal norms have shaped them. Now, this might have huge implications when it comes to citizen engagement efforts through Nudge Plus, because the reflection might work less for people who already feel less empowered to begin with. It could also work more, but I think the answer is we need to exploit these interaction effects with the vulnerable people, whether these are distributional consequences or it is the backward sort of part of the society who might respond less to some of these efforts.
Yes. Thanks, Sanchan. So at this point, we would have to move on. It was great getting to hear from all of you the varied perspectives you bring to climate change mitigation adaptation. And in engaging with all of you, myself and Ian, on this particular session of this event, we know for sure, and I know for sure, and believe strongly that with a united front, we cannot tackle climate change and its impact. A special thanks to you all for the great work you have put in making this research a success, of course, regardless of the uncertainties that came around that. Steering the wheel of the next phase of this event as a moderator is our very own Dr. LaRon Nelson. He is the Independence Foundation Associate Professor of Nursing and Associate Dean of Global Affairs and Planetary Health with the Yale School of Nursing. He's also an affiliate scientist with the MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions and the Kai Chen Knowledge Institute at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. Dr. Nelson has his work spanning multiple countries where he's focused on efforts to reduce racial disparities in HIV incidence, treatment, and viral suppression in Black communities. Currently, he is the protocol co-chair of the HPTN 096, which is a community randomized control trial testing, which is testing the efficacy of a multi-level intervention to increasing rates of pre-exposure prophylaxis uptake and HIV viral suppression among Black men who have sex with men, MSM as it's often known as well, in 16 communities across Southern United States. Of course, he wears many hats, and Dr. Nelson is an elected fellow in the American Academy of Nursing and a fellow in the New York Academy of Medicine. He has been honored by professional nursing organizations, including the Excellence in HIV Prevention Award by the Association of Nurses in AIDS Care and the President's Trailblazer Award by the National Black Nurses Association. Also, he is an associate editor for the Journal of Adolescent Health and serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Urban Health. In trying to put this together, I was also excited to know that he's done quite some work in my home country, Ghana. So without much ado, I would like to introduce, I would like to have you, Dr. Nelson, take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for that introduction, and thank you to UNE for your facilitation of that last student panel. It was fascinating and encouraging to learn about all the innovation that's happening across the world that young emerging scholars are leading. It is my pleasure to introduce the closing keynote speaker for this session, Dr. Kai Chen. Dr. Kai Chen is an assistant professor of environmental sciences at the Yale School of Public Health. Dr. Chen received his Ph.D. in environmental science and engineering in 2016 from Nanjing University in China. During 2014 to 15, he served as a visiting scholar at the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. Prior to joining the Yale School of Public Health faculty in July 2019, he was an Alexander von Humboldt postdoc fellow at Helmholtz-Zentrum, München, Germany Center for Environmental Health. Dr. Chen's research focuses on the intersection of climate change, air pollution, and human health. His work involves applying multidisciplinary approaches in climate change and air pollution sciences, exposure assessment, and environmental epidemiology to investigate how climate change may impact human health. Much of this work has been done in China, Europe, and the United States. Dr. Chen is also a co-chair of the Yale's Planetary Health Faculty Network that is a part of the Yale Institute of Global Health. It is my pleasure to have him join us today. It's my honor, and we look forward to hearing from you, Dr. Chen. Thank you.
Thanks, LaRon, for the very nice introduction, and thanks for the organizing committee for such a wonderful event, and thank you very much for the invitation. So without further ado, I will now begin my talk. So today is my great pleasure today to share with you some of the research findings from my research group on how do we connect the dots between climate change and health. So this summer, we have seen some extreme weather events. For example, we see the historical heatwave event in the Pacific Northwest. And this 1 in 1,000-year event has broken the previous temperature record in this region by more than 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And we see that it is not just heatwave. We have also seen raging floods across the world. In Western Germany and Belgium, we see hundreds of people died due to the unprecedented flooding events. And in a central city, China, we also see a devastating flooding events. In Mumbai, India, we saw flooding combined with landslides also brings damages. And even in big cities like London and New York City, we also see some damages from the flash flood. And quickly after that, the World Weather Attribution Initiative has determined that climate change is indeed making these extreme weather events more likely. The heavy rainfall behind the severe flooding in Western Europe was made more likely by climate change. And the Pacific Northwest heatwave event was virtually impossible without the human-caused climate change. So what we are right now, according to the IPCC 6 report, is that today we are already about 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than the pre-industrial world, which is about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we are going to choose our current pathway without achieving the net zero emission, we will be in a world by the end of this century about 3 to 5 degrees Celsius warmer, way higher than the Paris Agreement. So only when we can achieve the net zero emissions, that we follow the low emission pathway, that we can still maintain the global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. So what does climate change impact on our health? It can impact directly through all these extreme weather events we discussed, but also indirectly, it can worsen our water quality, air quality, and through some ecological system changes, they can compound it with our social dynamic changes, can affect not just our physical health, but also our mental health. But today, my talk will be just focused on temperature as the direct effect and air pollution as an indirect effect. And I would like to share some of the works from our group. So speaking of the health effects of temperature, what we know is that the relationship between temperature and health risks is not just about heat waves. The relationship is more like a U-shape, meaning that when temperature goes up or when temperature goes too low, you will have increased mortality risk. And then for this figure, if you look at the right side of the high temperature, what you can see is that the high temperature does not go to as far as 99th percentile this high to become deadly. Even the moderate temperature exposure at high temperatures, what we call it moderate heat, can lead to significant increased mortality risks. Similarly, the moderate cold can also lead to substantial increased mortality risks. But if we decompose in this all-cause mortality to look at which type of disease are affected by extreme temperatures, especially heat, what we can see is that heat exposure can actually lead to more heart attack events. So the left figure shows a similar U-shaped relationship. And on the right side, you can see with temperature goes up, you will have more incidences of heart attacks. And what we did later is we look at the future and the different global warming scenarios. And what we found is that compared to the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, each bit of additional warming will lead to increased temperature-related heart attack burden. So this really illustrates that failing to meet the Paris Agreement would result in substantial health damages. And it's not just about the heart disease. It is also about some other cardiovascular system disease like stroke. So here in this study, we look at how heat exposure can impact both ischemic stroke and hemorrhagic stroke. We found not only these relationships are significant, but they are more prevalent in certain populations. For example, the female, the elderly, and people have low education level. So these people are generally more vulnerable and suffering more damages from the heat exposure on the stroke mortality risks. So over the years, we have found a lot of evidence, including some other studies by my group, found that temperature can actually also lead to kidney disease. However, all of these diseases are physical diseases. But what about our mental health? One of our recent collaboration with Dr. Ying-Hee Yu from the University of Buffalo found that across the New York State, we found high temperature exposure can actually lead to increased emergency room visits for mental disorders. And we found this is not just true for total mental disorders, but virtually true for all the subcategories, including anxiety disorder, mood disorder, substance abuse, schizophrenia, and even dementia. So although this is only exploratory, but it does shed light on the potential understudied health impacts of temperature and air pollution in general on mental health. So what we did after that is try to quantify how much of the mortality burden can be attributed to this either heat or cold exposure. So here in this study led by my doctoral student Yi Ma, we look at a Chinese province in Jiangsu province and try to quantify all these organ system diseases that can be significantly associated with either heat or cold exposure. And what we found is roughly 12% of these diseases of the all-cause mortality can be attributed to either heat or cold. And the majority of this burden occurs in cardiovascular diseases like stroke, heart attack, and respiratory illness. But we also observed a significant proportion from these non-natural external cause of deaths. And when we look at the future, the climate is warming, but it's not just climate. We know our society is getting it's becoming more and more towards aging. So what we know about the elderly population is from the epidemiological studies, we know elderly people are generally more vulnerable. They are not only more vulnerable to heat, but also to cold. So here, as illustrated in this figure, the people more than 75 years old has higher mortality risk when temperature goes up and also when temperature goes down. So as a consequence, if we combine the climate projections with population projections and with our population aging trend, what we can observe is that in some scenarios, if you don't consider population aging, you might have actually some decreases in the future total temperature-related mortality burden because you have less cold exposure. However, if you consider the population aging, that is not the case because more people are getting elderly and more vulnerable to cold. So it turns out that across all the possible combinations or climate and population scenarios, cold exposure in this example study in Germany, we found that it does not actually decrease. So overall, we found a significant net increase in the future temperature-related mortality burden. So this really illustrates that population aging can play a critical role by amplifying all the potential climate change-related health impacts. And the second piece I want to talk about is the indirect effects from air pollution. And over the past decades, epidemiologists has documented the linkage between the air pollution exposure and its worst health effects. And these effects shows virtually all the organ systems. And my research group is also fortunate to contribute to some of these knowledges. For example, our recent research in collaboration with Dr. Sarah Lowe at Yale School of Public Health, we found that air pollution can also lead to increased mental health outpatient visits. And in collaboration with Dr. Lei Huang at Nanjing University, China, we found that the increased pollution can also lead to increased mental stress among the pregnant women. And in collaboration with my German colleagues, we found that some tiny particles that are much, much smaller than PM2.5, they can actually lead to increased heart attack events. And here at Yale, our PhD student Lin Zhichu, in collaboration with the Chinese CDC, Dr. Tian Li, we found that the air pollution exposure in terms of the PM10 and PM2.5, they can actually lead to increased emergency room visits for kidney diseases. And among all these air pollutants, one of the pollution I want to highlight is ozone pollution. So ozone is generated in the air with a chemical reaction from nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds. And with temperature goes up and with warming climate, a lot of this, what we call is precursors of these compounds, they will increase. And the chemical reaction increase, thus leading to overall increasing ozone pollution in some already heavily polluted urban areas. And then we did a study in more than 100 Chinese cities, what we found is that if we go follow the business as usual scenario that has a high emission, and what we can expect is by the middle of this century, climate warming alone will lead to 10% more ozone-related mortality, causing a problem that we call climate penalty. But if we, as I mentioned before, if we consider not just climate change, if we consider also population aging, and we know that our life expectancy has been increasing, so the mortality rate is decreasing. That could be a potential benefit. But if we consider all these different factors, what it turns out is that population aging has the largest effect. So by the mid-2050, across these 120 cities, population aging could yield to 1 to 4 times net increase in the ozone-related excess mortality, even in a scenario that we have a relatively good moderate emission reductions. So that means, indeed, the combining threats from both climate warming and population aging would have substantial health damages. So what we can do about it? Well, I think the previous panel also mentioned this about the COVID-19 pandemic and the air pollution. So during the air pollution, we see that worldwide lockdown measures has bring some clean air. And at the beginning of this pandemic, during the Wuhan lockdown, we actually seen the air pollution reduction is so dramatic that you can just use the satellite image without converting that to a ground level air pollution level. From this satellite image, comparing the left figure before pandemic and the right figure during the COVID-19 lockdown, we can see traffic pollutant, nitrogen dioxide. The satellite image shows substantial reduction. And back then, our group did one of the first study to try to look at the answer, does this potential reduction in air pollution bring us any benefit? And if so, how much? So we quantified the air pollution reductions during these COVID-19 lockdowns across China. And we calculate all these potential non-COVID-19 deaths potentially being avoided by this air pollution reduction. So the results shows there could be more than tens of thousands non-COVID-19 deaths being avoided. And until still today, the official death toll of COVID-19 in China is less than 5,000. So we can see these dramatic benefits of air pollution reduction. It's really kind of a wake-up call, reminding us that if we were to address the climate change as aggressively as we are combating the COVID-19 pandemic, and with strong political will and urgent actions, we could prevent the enormous health burden that are associated with climate change and air pollution. However, the story is that these improvement in air pollution is only temporary, unfortunately. And so the same true for carbon emissions. Last year, due to the quickly recovery in China, what we can see is China's emission is only dropped by 1.4%. And one of the recent study by Dr. Liu Zhu's study at Tsinghua University, and also one of the panelists in the earlier session, shows that the global carbon emission has rebounded back to normal. So what we can do moving forward to achieve a sustainable health benefit, what we need is actually to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, to turn to clean energy, to use more public transportation, use less private cars to reduce the carbon emissions. But in the meantime, also given that global warming is inevitable in the coming decades, what we need to do is take actions to help reduce those that are most vulnerable to climate change. So in summary, I want to summarize that climate change can impact both directly through these extreme weather events, but also indirectly through air pollution. And coupled with population aging, they can impact not just our physical health, but also our mental health. And to move forward, mitigation and adaptation is really the solution, not a COVID-19 lockdown. So lastly, I would like to thank my research team at the Yale Center on Climate Change and Health, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Before we get into the question and answer period, I want to invite Nazanin Tarchi back to the stage to join us. She was our opening keynote speaker. We will take questions from you both, or present questions to you both. Great, thank you, welcome back. I also want to remind the audience that the chat is now open, the chat function in this webinar. You can also use that chat to post questions for Dr. Chen or Ms. Tarchi, and I will take a look at those and present them as we start our discussion. And so, Dr. Chen, I'll start with you. This is very interesting, what you presented, particularly the two things I'll start with. One is the idea that these sort of advances in reducing mortality that we've been able to achieve are being mitigated by the impact of climate change, so that we've been successful in getting people to live longer, but at the same time now they're more exposed to these climate impacts, which have more likelihood to then increase mortality among that group. And this interesting conundrum, which was, I mean, you talked about mental health, and the conundrum of the impact of sort of quarantine on air pollution, but also what we know about the mental health impacts of limiting human movement. We started to learn a lot more about that. And so what may be a lesson you think we can take from what turned out to be some benefits from the ways in which societies restructured themselves in the context of this pandemic that might have some potential for carryover post-pandemic that doesn't actually exacerbate mental health issues, but it might be something that you saw that you may say, this might be something that could work if we figured out how to do this.
Yeah, thanks, LaRon. Exactly. That's why I call it the kind of benefits that potential benefits of what achieved due to the lockdown is not sustainable. It's not sustainable in terms of emission reduction, but also not sustainable in terms of you can't expect the whole society shut down in order to achieve that, right? Especially all the adverse consequences, including the mental stress, right? So that's definitely one thing. But one of the lessons, I think, all the things we observed during this COVID-19 pandemic is that so far we have like roughly 5 million COVID-19 direct death toll worldwide, but air pollution every year kills 7 million people every year. And temperature, I'll just talk about it. Different studies show that both heat and cold can kill people roughly 2 to 5 million every year. So adding that up, you can see why climate change is regarding the largest public health threat in this century, right? But this, the air pollution and extreme temperature effects from climate change is more like a silent pandemic, right? We don't, at least the whole society does not pay as much attention as we are dealing with the COVID-19. Although from the consequences, climate change is by no means not less than the COVID-19. So I think that's the lockdown really gave us a window, a kind of natural experiment, saying that if you don't believe that if we reduce the emissions, that we can achieve a better clean air, you see that from the lockdowns, right? So without this is something I think as people can see it from their own eyes. We saw that not just in China, in India, in Delhi, right? Even in the United States. So I think that's one of the big takeaway from this COVID-19 pandemic, that if we act unitedly and aggressively as we are dealing with the COVID, I think that's the way we should, and the society, the government leaders should, meet the goal at least the COP26 event.
Thank you. On the topic of air, Destiny, you talked about, you talked about air in the context of these food storage facilities and the impact of ethylene that gets produced there. Can you say to what degree ethylene contributes to, if it does or not, this, I think Dr. Chen, you talked about these sources of ozone. So I was very curious about, if we think about air within these facility environments, but how that might be connected to what is contributing to the overall air quality in our communities. Any thoughts on that?
Sure, just before answering your question, I want to say it was a great presentation by Dr. Chen, and our research group has been working on improving indoor air quality. And as Dr. Chen mentioned, climate change has a great impact on the air pollution, and air pollution outside directly inside the quality of air indoor our buildings. And when it comes inside the buildings, it becomes much more concentrated, and it's a greater threat for our health. And it shows, and also, especially like during this pandemic, working from home and all of this, we spend almost around 90% of our time indoor. So we need to be very, very, very careful, and we should think about the effect of climate change in a bigger picture. It can affect all the aspects of our life. So it's not just related to some specific area, it's affecting many sides of our life that most of the time we don't think about that. So just I want to emphasize on that. And coming back to specifically our research about ethylene, as I mentioned during my presentation, presence of ethylene in the environment, such as growth chambers, because these days the smart farming technologies are very common in the growth chambers that they are using, and the fruit and vegetables itself, they are producing ethylene because it's a growth hormone. And after a certain level, this ethylene can cause chemical and physical changes and spoil the fruit and vegetables, and it can happen in growth chambers, storage rooms, and it can be at any stage in the retail, in consumers, and simply in our refrigerator. Like simply every day, every week, we can see that like many fruit and vegetables are spoiled, just we are putting them away. And these numbers, when we are putting all together, from consumers to retail and transportation and all of these, it's a huge number. The carbon footprint of the fruits and vegetables that are being produced but not consumed and just throwing away. So it's getting a huge number, and as I mentioned, based on the statistic, it's one of the greater contributors to the greenhouse gas emitter. It's being ranked as a third biggest carbon dioxide emitter. So it shows the fact that we should think about this. And also, like governments, they have some plans to reduce this by 2030. And of course, the numbers are different in developing and developed countries. And the story is much more serious in developing countries because of the poor infrastructure in transportation and the storage of the fruit and vegetables. But it's strongly believed that, like, by reducing it and removing some parameters like ethylene, and as I mentioned, it's not just ethylene, some other factors like pathogens, mold, bacteria, and these things. It's believed that we can decrease the fruit and vegetable losses, and it can benefit a lot, and it can help a lot in our fight against climate change.
Thank you, Nasanina. I'm going to ask this question, which it may be a silly question to ask in the context of capital-driven markets, but if if we are able to, your research is showing the possibilities for reducing food loss. Do you think so I'm relating this to what Dr. Chen talked about briefly when he mentioned adaptation and mitigation. Have you considered the impact of your research on reducing food loss as a way to sort of decrease the need for overproducing food if we can keep it fresher longer? I mean, that was where my mind went, but that may be too idealist to think that maybe we put less stress on the planet if we can reduce the amount of food that we're losing, that we don't have to, even with smart farming, we may have to farm the earth less if we can keep more of what we produce. Any sort of thoughts on that in terms of the impact of what you're learning in your research, or thoughts about what it might mean for how we manage the earth?
Sure. One of the biggest challenges now, especially in countries with harsh climate. I live in Canada, the well-known winter in Canada, and we have northern territories in Canada. They struggle with providing sustainable food sources. And for example, in northern territories in Canada, it's in winter time. It's tough to find fresh and fruit and vegetables. And one of the ideas of smart farming technology is providing sustainable source of fruit and vegetables in countries with harsh climate. I consider Canada, but there are many other countries as well. And at the other side, we have many fresh fruit and vegetables that are being produced but not consumed. By removing the ethylene and other sources and increasing the shelf life of these fruit and vegetables, as you mentioned, we can overcome this problem of the food insecurity in many areas. And just it would be a huge number. It would be really a huge number to provide fresh fruit and vegetables and sustainable food sources, as you mentioned. And also, if you want to consider the economical part, it's a great and it's a very huge economical losses every year by losing this huge amount of food and vegetable. And as you mentioned, it can, like if we can work very well in this area, we can overcome food insecurity and at the same time climate change, both of them.
Thank you. Dr. Chen, I want to bring up a question in the chat. This is from Tao Chun Sun. It says, hi, Professor Kai Chen, thanks for mentioning the carbon monitor. Your research is more focused on the individual impacts of pollutions to public health, with mental health in particular. Lots of studies use macro models such as gains to investigate country city level impacts. How do you think you can do can you make some connections between the two, these sort of macro level and individual level? I think that is the question being asked.
Yeah, thanks, LaRon, and thanks, Tao Chen, for this question. Yeah, so a lot of my research, what we call is epidemiological research. The goal is to provide the evidence, what we call the exposure response functions between your exposure and your health outcome, the linkages, and what here mentions the gains model, I believe is from YASA. It's a policy analysis tool, and some other tools like in the US that EPA has a FNAP tool that is kind of analysis tool that helps you understand different climate policy can lead to emission changes, and then how that emission changes leads to air pollution changes. And in order to calculate its health benefits or damages, and then economic benefits or damages, you need that link. And that link is provided by environmental epidemiology. More especially here for air pollution is air pollution epidemiology. I'm really glad that you asked a question about how do you make the connection to this, because in doing climate change and health research, it's a multidisciplinary research. So what we need is not just epidemiological research and not just climate science or just policy science. We need connect them all. So in a lot of my research, especially shown here, is in collaboration with some climate scientists, policy, population demographers, we are trying to make the linkage from the policy to emission, to air pollution, to health.
Dr. Chen, thank you. And thank you for joining us. I know you have to sign off, and I'm glad you're able to join us for these, take these questions. I just want to mention, given this focus on food and health, and even my role as a person who works in the health sector, it was stunning what you presented earlier about the impact of heat exposure, what heat changes on mental health. And even because we know that the health systems, how they operate, also produces carbon emissions, and that the idea that as the earth heats up, these places heat up in different ways, that is leading to increases in emergency department visits, which also is going to produce more heat and put more carbon into the environment. So I had not seen that before. It was stunning, but it really does show how this is also connected. And I think taking on what you said, the last point about mitigation, I think as we figure out how to keep the planet from heating more, I think health systems should also figure out how we can sort of absorb the surge that's going to come from things like mental health exacerbations or cardiac health or other types of health outcomes, but ways that also figure out how to do that without putting more heat stress back into the environment. So thank you for offering that to us to think about, and appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, LaRon. Honored to be here.
Thank you. So,
bye.
Bye-bye. Nazanin, this is going to be you and I having a conversation, and I have a couple more questions for you, so thank you. Earlier in your talk, you talked about the work that you're doing to look at differences in the catalyst between dry environments and humid environments. Can you talk more about, are there differences in the rates of food loss between those types of environments? Why is it important to know how those work in these two different types of climates?
Sure. Our research group for a long time, we have been working on indoor air qualities and different type of, as Dr. Chen mentioned, volatile organic compounds, different type of hydrocarbon. It was our first time focusing on specifically ethylene. For each specific hydrocarbon, we need to develop specific catalysts. We don't have a general rule that once we develop a catalyst, it's gonna work for everything. We need to develop a specific catalyst for each of them and test to see how it works. It was our first time specifically working on ethylene based on the demand. And then at the first steps, as I mentioned, we need to study the chemistry behind this reaction and develop and design a good catalyst. To do so and to precisely do this, at the beginning, we need to simplify the environment that we are considering as much as we can. And to do so, at the beginning, we start with dry air, because once we have water in the air, it makes everything complicated for catalysts. Catalysts have some active sites. I don't want to go through the very boring engineering things, but very simply, it has some active sites, and presence of water. Water would plug these active sites, so we make everything complicated. At the first step, and to just study the phenomena, we need to make everything simple, and then just focus on the catalyst and the absorption of ethylene and oxidizers, anything on the catalyst. To do so, at the first step, we consider just dry air. But in reality, we don't have dry air. If we consider our refrigerator, storage, or growth chambers, we would have humidity in the air. We would have water and different percentages for humidity. But at the first step, we consider dry air and then study these the interaction of the ethylene and the catalyst to see how it's work. And then, as I mentioned, it was a very back and forth designing, characterizing, and activity measurement for the catalyst. Once we make sure that our catalyst has the properties that we want, and it's working well in the absorption of these things for ethylene and other things, then at the next step, we can get closer to the real and complicated environment, which is presence of the water in the air and different percentage for the humidity. And over there, we add humidity to the air and study the activity of the catalyst. And then, of course, in reality, we would have another pollutants in the air as well, but water and presence of water is more challenging when we are working with catalysts.
Thank you for explaining that. Now, one of the photos you showed in your presentation looked like a pretty sophisticated facility. And I thought, is that, if you could characterize, is that type of facility common? Is that just really a Canadian phenomenon? Or are they really those types of places around the world? Like how big?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there are some synchrotron, the synchrotron-based centers, there are specific centers. We are lucky we have one in Canada, and also we are lucky we have one in the one in Canada is in our campus in University of Saskatchewan. So we can simply just, it's in our walking distance. Yeah, like as I said, to make sure that catalyst is working and also to make sure that the catalyst that we have make is working very well, we need to go to the atomic level, and to go there just with simple normal characterization, we couldn't do that. We can do that, of course, but it's not very precise in a way that we want. But going to the atomic level, we will get whatever we want, and we like precisely we would see what's happening over there. So yeah, we have Canadian light source on campus in University of Saskatchewan. We call it the brightest light in Canada. Of course, there are some synchrotron-based facilities everywhere, but it's just the one in northern America, in just Canada. And over there, we are using different techniques, X-ray absorption spectroscopy, including Zane and XFs and some high resolution XRDs and fair distribution function, and just very detailed, we can see what's happening in our catalyst, where is oxygen molecule, where is our metal located, and everywhere.
I understand. So that was a picture of a laboratory, not a food storage facility.
No, that's a picture of the Canadian light source that we are using to characterize our catalyst.
Understood. So is ethylene use, is that something that's generally common in food storage facilities, wherever they might be across the world? Is that's my question.
Yeah, and like even like when you're putting fruit in the refrigerator, they still keep producing ethylene as well. And that's why if you keep your fruit in the refrigerator for a couple of weeks, you would see that they're getting spoiled. You need to just throw them away. And and that's the idea, is that we are trying to develop a technology that we can apply it everywhere, not in just a large scale storage facilities or transportation facilities, but also even in smaller scale. Our refrigerators needs to be utilized with these type of technologies that help us to increase the shelf life of the fruit and vegetable as well. And it's going to be very helpful.
Have you or your team estimated I'm not sure if it's time saved or time gained, but the potential increase in shelf life of food through this use of this technology?
We haven't done that directly because like, we have mainly focused on the process and catalyst, but there are many research and there are many published papers that they have studied they have two, like in a simple word, they have two environments, the one which is control environment by removing ethylene, but the other one is normal environment that fruit and vegetables keep producing ethylene with no treatment. And they have reported that with this one, they have seen a significant increase in the shelf life of the fruit and vegetable. So it's very effective to remove ethylene from these storages. And it's not, as I mentioned, it's not just ethylene. We have other type of pathogens, some viruses, some molds as well. Yeah, but there is certain research in that is very effective.
Now, if you looked in my refrigerator, you probably wouldn't see much actually. But before the pandemic, you might have seen a lot of different types of foods in my refrigerator that I'm trying to keep fresh. And some of it is meat, for example. So I wondered, what are your thoughts about the potential applications of your research to other foods that gets lost, that we're trying, that we could keep fresher longer? So I'm thinking particularly about things that are not fruits and vegetables. Does this have potential application beyond not losing fruits and vegetables to other types of food that people store, either in facilities or at home?
We have been specifically working on ethylene, and as I said in another research on the pathogens. I'm not pretty sure about the other beyond fruit and vegetables. Of course, there should be in the research as well, because again, when we are talking about these things beyond fruit and vegetable, which is meat or other things, again, some specific type of pathogens are involved over there. So most probably, if we are able to remove these pathogens from the air, it might work for them as well, but I'm not pretty sure about that. So it's beyond my knowledge. So I don't want to tell anything that's not scientific. So, but most probably, and the idea of the increase of the shelf life of these fruit and vegetables, it's very handy and it's very common in NASA experiment as well, when they're sending people to the space. So it's important for them to provide fresh fruit and vegetable over there. They're trying to grow vegetables in the other space as well. So it has a limited application, but it still has application over there as well.
Thank you. I like to push people, so I appreciate you not taking the bait on some of these things, and also referencing other work that's been done that your work builds on, but also runs in parallel to other people who are doing research in similar areas. I wanted to ask about pathogens. So when you talk about pathogens in the air and its impact, are you talking specifically about pathogens or pathogens that specifically affect fruit and vegetables, or do these pathogens potentially also have impact on humans? Yes.
Yeah, like we had this idea before the pandemic, and like as we were working on ethylene, but we knew that it's not just ethylene, there are other type of the pathogens as well, but we haven't done anything on the pathogens. And there is not much research on the pathogens removal as well. There are, but not with catalysts. So after emergence of this COVID-19, we started to work on applying our technology to inactivation of the pathogens from air. And we started specifically, the idea was that we're going to apply this technology to remove pathogens such as COVID-19, because it was confirmed that it's being transmitted through the air. So, and our group was working on improving indoor air quality. And then we thought, okay, let's try this. When we are able to remove other chemicals, it should work for pathogens as well. So we start working on removing pathogens, and the target was pathogens such as COVID-19, but we started from the very smallest level, which we call it phage, which is not very harmful for human being, but at the first level, usually these type of research start from phage. We start from that one, and now we are working on that as well, but we are hoping that if our technology works for specifically, for example, phage, it should be effective for other types of the pathogens as well. So it should be effective for removing specific type of pathogens in a storage environment, and at the end, increasing the shelf life of fruit and vegetables.
Thank you. I just have one other question, and I'm trying to not make this feel like a dissertation defense.
No.
Okay, good. So at Yale, we're really, and maybe in other universities around the world, really concerned about equity and the ways in which these advances can be enjoyed equitably around the world in economies that are not as privileged as the ones in Canada or the United States, for example. And what thoughts do you have, or have your team given to the potential for these innovations to be accessible in other places that could benefit from it? But yeah, any thoughts about the potential scale up of this in places that really need it, but might need it at a price that's affordable?
Yeah, like so far we have been working on the laboratory scale, and as I mentioned, based on the promising result that we got, we have moved to the next stage, trying to scale up our process. And when we are working on catalyst, it's a little bit complicated and it needs time for the scaling up the process, and especially when we are dealing the health and well-being of the people and we want to have a claim, we should be very careful. So we are trying to precisely study everything. That's why it's taking a little bit time. But as you mentioned, we are trying to develop our technology that it can be used in anywhere. Especially we are considering safety factors, that because many technologies that are being used now, they cannot be utilized in presence of human, or we are trying to consider all the safety factors that our technology, with some specific changes, but with little changes, can be applied in any places, from large scale storage and transportation facilities, if they need in presence of human or not, and in retail store, and like specifically coming in consumers stage, and to be applied in our, like simply in our refrigerator as well. So we are trying our best to consider different, the idea start with applying the technology in smart farming technologies in the growth chambers. And then we thought, okay, let's design and try to develop a technology in a way that with just simple little changes, it can be applied in any environment. So yeah, that's our goal, to consider different customers, and at the end, customize the process based on the customer's need.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think what you're doing is an important model for other scientists, because I think we can be so focused on the experiment. Let's just test to see whether or not this does what we hypothesize it to do, without thinking about sort of larger scale up or implementation possibilities for it, right? It could, the fact that you're testing it in different types of environments, dry and humid, I think it could have implications for what materials get used. When you think about how you design these products, what are these materials widely available? Could you get them in South Asia? Could you get them in Africa? Could you get them in parts of North? Like, that is important. Think about, does it require the use of more resources to construct it? Or can we repurpose existing resources? You mentioned about the catalytic converter. I was like, man, there's a lot of catalytic converters sitting in junkyards all around the world. Like, but it could
catalysts are everywhere. Catalysts are everywhere. Yeah. And this year's chemistry Nobel Prizes, they won the Nobel Prize because of the catalysts, so they're everywhere.
Yes. So I think it's important that we think about not just can we get some interesting scientific answers, but also still be thinking about too how it really might have an impact on the world, and infusing that into how we design our studies, and think about the implications of the studies, especially about who will be able to enjoy the benefits of the innovation. And we know structurally how that is typically looked, the distribution of those benefits and the distribution of the disadvantages, just as we can see how that plays out in terms of the climate impact and who it disproportionately impacts in societies that aren't structurally able to build different types of resistance or resiliencies to what's happening. So let me just say thank you. Good morning. I know it's very early where you are, but it's been quite a pleasure and honor to hear from you, someone who's so knowledgeable about this particular field, especially being a PhD student, to come in on this global stage and present the way that you did, and to be able to offer us some different ways to think about ways that we can be thinking about a different future and how we can use engineering, right? I don't think about engineering in food often as I'm doing right now, but thinking about ways that we can engineer benefit for ourselves, including stopping food waste and food loss. And so I just want to thank you again for sharing your talents with us today.
Thank you so much. And at the end, I want to say, at the first step, we need to accept that there is a problem. We have climate change. And then at the second step, we need to trust in science. And we should believe that by trust to the science, we can solve the problems, and all of us need to work together. As you mentioned, for example, for the research that we are doing on the inactivation of pathogen, it's not just possible with engineers, or I would say it's a multidisciplinary research. All of us need to work together. We have a multidisciplinary team from chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, health sciences, and all of us working together. So to solve the climate change problem, again, all of us need to work together. And thank you so much for inviting me and having me here.
Well, you know what, you can tap into some nurses over there at University of Saskatchewan, because I know they have a very strong nursing school there.
Oh.
So I think, to your point about being multidisciplinary, I think there are different ways that we think about these problems. I mean, some of the stuff that you talked about today just did not occur to me, because it's not stuff that we engage with in our discipline. So I think there's a lot of benefit from having different professions and disciplines be able to sort of think together, talk together, and work together to design solutions that really optimize the potential impact it can have if we're able to think about these sort of multi-level, sophisticated ways that we can really build these innovations. So thank you again for that.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. So that brings us to the end of this session. It's been a pleasure to co-host this. There's so many people that helped put this together, and I just want to take some time, just a few moments, to recognize them. This was led by the Yale School of Nursing's Office of Global Affairs and Planetary Health, Sohini Sudeshmut and Marianne Marshak, who are here somewhere, spent a lot of time on this. Thank you. Thank you also to Emily Roback and her team at Yale Conference and Events for all the coordination and logistics support. You had a chance to hear from Ian and Jessica, who are both students here at Yale. Thank you for taking time to facilitate the student presenters discussion. Thank you to the students. It was impressive to hear about all the work that you're leading and in different ways, from the work that's happening. I was presented from Tokyo, even the work on nudging and prompts out of the London School of Economics, and all the amazing work from Qingsha, who's definitely represented here today. And also thank you to our Dean Ann Kurth, who's been a champion in global health and planetary health, both at the school, the university level, and on the global stage. It's been our pleasure to host this. We hope you have enjoyed the conference so far, the Youth Summit. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the summit as you participate in other activities. I think today was an opportunity for us to really think about not just the impact of climate change on health, but also on sources that we rely on to nourish and sustain our health, like food. There are multiple potential impacts of climate change, but also what we heard today were multiple ways that we can contribute to not just mitigation, but also adaptation through different interventions that we learned about. So I want to thank you again. Good morning to some of you, good day to some of you, and good evening to many of you. Have a good day.